being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
The Athletic.
Coming up, we discuss Aston Martin and whether they might adopt a new approach after the latest reshuffle. We look at the Constructors' Championship battle and ask which of McLaren, Ferrari or Red Bull might win it. And Gary answers another load of your technical questions. Welcome to another episode of the Race F1 Tech Show. As always, I'm Edd Straw, but the star of the show, Gary Anderson, is here with me, eagerly anticipating the triple header that's coming up. Strange end to the season, isn't it? With triple header, 2-week gap, triple header.
It is a strange episode. It's difficult to understand why it's ended up like that, I suppose, but it's just because the races are so far apart. But the big thing about it is, we had a reasonable gap up to Mexico, I suppose it was. Or Austin, sorry. So it meant that the teams could, put a better package together for those three races, Austin, Mexico, and Brazil. I don't think there'll be any great developments coming to these last three, because obviously it is the last three of the season. The caveat to that is that the car regulations for next year are staying, 99% the same. So there's nothing lost by trying to understand the car a bit better, or even making it a little bit better. If you do put stuff on for the end of the year, depending upon what your philosophy is for 2025, whether it's going to be a new chassis or a completely different concept or whatever. We talk about concepts like it's an open book, and it's very, very far from that. The cars next year, the driver has to sit in the same place, the fuel tank's got the same size, the engine's the same, power unit's the same. Everything's more or less the same as it is now, so it's not as though you can sort of scratch your head and I put the fuel tank in front of the driver, or like the old days. So the concept is it's a loose concept. I would think the geometry of the bottom of the chassis might be an area you would look at, because that sort of blends into what the underfloor's like quite a lot. So it depends on whether you think you've got that wrong or not as to whether you make a new chassis. I think as far as the rest of it's concerned, would you go from a push rod to a pull rod or something like that in the front end? So there will be changes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you couldn't sort of look a bit deeper into the aerodynamic package for these last three races and see if you can learn something, especially for those teams that have got themselves a little bit lost. But I'm looking forward to it, because it is the battle royal to the last race now with the Constructors' Championship at least, and who's got two drivers to really get stuck in there and try and do the best job possible.
Exactly. Well, we're going to be talking about that in the second part of this podcast. Although you're talking about teams looking forward to next year, there's a few teams in this final triple header who are more focused on scraping what they can out of the parts bin, particularly Williams, who had 3 crashes on Sunday. There are a few other teams as well, but Williams are the ones who seem to be in the biggest hole. So you've, I presume, been in that sort of situation as well, but often being in budget limited teams, that was kind of a way of life. But what's that process like when you're trying to scrape together a car spec using kind of bits that you've got left over, bits that you've maybe patched together, and then working out the kind of bare minimum you can manufacture of current year parts? Because obviously you don't want to put more onto the cost cap than you have to, even if you've got the money.
Well, I think this is the one big test for Williams as to whether their systems work, because that's the thing about it, is knowing exactly what you've got. You don't go out to the truck and have a look in the back locker and see if you've got another nose or front wing or something in there. The system should be such that it's self-reporting. You just put in the parts that are written off, and it leaves you with a certain amount of all the bits on the car. So then you have to focus in on the bits that are minimal, and whether or not you can make the latest spec, or whether you have to sort of refurb some of the old bits. I mean, we've been many times through the years, we've been left with a whole load of carbon fibre debris, and had to sort of plant it back together again somehow because there just wasn't time to make a new bits. But, James Fallows has been going on about the systems. That's what they lack, is their understanding of what they have and the time it takes to make stuff. And, that's now an old story. So this will test if the system they've got works. It's like anything, the car is made up of a huge amount of bits, but what we saw accident damage-wise is all around the periphery of it: suspension, side pods, radiators, wings, front and rear wings, noses, wheels, brakes, uprights. So it's, if there's any chassis damage on those two cars, that will need a patch-up. There's no way they can make a new chassis in time. But I would expect them to get to Vegas in reasonable shape as far as having two cars is concerned. It's what damage happens in Vegas that might catch them out, It's a bit of a gamble, to say the least, going to Vegas. But, the two drivers, it's one of these things, you can't tell them to just take it easy, because they don't have an accident because they go out to have an accident. They have an accident because it's an accident. So it's not as though you can turn around to them and say, just be a bit careful, chap, Obviously, the minute you do that is half a second gone or more, and you can have an accident. So, because, it's not the way they drive. You drive on your instincts. So the drivers need to be able to push the car to feel and light up their instincts as to what the car is doing and react to it. If you're sort of driving around in, one arm out of the cockpit, that's whenever things do go wrong for you. So it's better to let it just happen. You're going to have two cars leaving the pit lane first practice, and it's down to just trying to keep it neat and tidy. And as I say, it'd be what's left behind there. And if they don't have any incidents and accidents, I expect they can have a good weekend.
I must admit, I quite enjoy some of the bigger teams having to feel the squeeze of being limited on budgets, because they complain about it. But you think, well, try running one of the smaller teams for years that are always having to do that sort of thing. But it has caught out some of the bigger teams, because even Mercedes, they were trying to get through to the end of the season without introducing a new monocoque, because with the cost cap rules, you can make things. So you obviously spent the money on making them. But if you don't use them, you don't have to use them for the cost cap accounting. So when they had to put the new chassis in for when Russell had his crash in Mexico, that was suddenly a six-figure sum that was against the cost cap that they have to then sort of cut back a bit on parts. So, it makes for an interesting challenge. But I think the topic you wanted to talk about in part one is another team that had a few crashes of their own in Interlagos in Aston Martin.
Yeah, Aston Martin. I mean, I think in an all-round picture, they've been disappointing. And I think that's an understatement, I suppose. But, yeah, they had a bit of accident and incident as well. So everything's sort of gone wrong for them. They've gone from beginning of 2023 being potentially a podium contender on most occasions, to mid-2023 dropping away from that, to the latter part of 2023 looking like they might have slightly stabilised. I wouldn't have said regroup, but I would have said stabilised. And then, as I said, from the beginning of 2024, it's sort of turned out a bit of a disaster. It started off not stupidly bad, but not really any better than the end of 2023. And it's progressively got worse. There's been the odd glimmer of hope now and again, but that happens to every team, to be honest. So they need to look a little bit as to why that happened. And obviously the change now with Dan Fallows being moved into a different position from being technical director. I know how that feels, being technical director and things going wrong for you. So I can understand and I sympathise. But, if I look closely at the sort of, let's say, the company philosophy, if we go back to what was called the Pink Mercedes, the company philosophy then was to change their whole concept of what they had, their whole aerodynamic concept, which was high-rate car and, visually very different, to a car that looked visually, other than the paint scheme, very similar to a Mercedes. And, that sort of gave them a year of good results. They even won a race with Checo. So, then it sort of went wrong again because they didn't know how to develop that car. That's the problem. You can, and I use the word copy loosely here, you can copy a car for sure, but if you don't understand why, and you don't understand the philosophy behind the aerodynamic platform, and it's not your own mental philosophy, your mental direction, then developing it is a very, very tough task. And I think it's been proven again now. You know, when Dan Fallows came, the 2023 car was very much we call it a green Red Bull. It was a Red Bull philosophy package. And then again, it's the same old deal. You know, now you've got to stand on your own 2 feet and take it further. And that is always difficult. Now, this is 2 occasions where Aston Martin, in my book, have proven that they did use ideas from other cars, which everybody does. But, you know, you try to optimize it against your own parts. You try to optimize your car all the time using other people's ideas, but you don't just build a complete package and say, let's see what happens. So it's disappointing for me that the company philosophy within as it was Racing Point and now Aston Martin has been to allow that to happen. You know, they haven't been I don't know, strong enough to stand on their own 2 feet. And also, I mean, they've just been employing people right, left and centre, top end, you know, mid-range, you name it. Whenever you do that, you know, nobody knows who they're working for or who calls the shots. There's always just that uncertainty within the company for just to go to somebody and get an answer out of them. You know, where are we going to put this? Oh, we're going to put that, you know, up beside the driver's left hand. And somebody else will say, no, but that should be behind his shoulder. You know, it depends on what your opinion is of it. So you need that one person to lead the ship. You know, there's a captain and he should be leading that ship. He doesn't have to be an absolute expert in everything, but he has to know enough and a good vision to see the whole package and to see how it all sort of might knit together. And I don't think they've ever had that at Aston Martin they've never had it at Aston Martin because they've tried to find solutions to just a mass amount of people with massive amount of ideas and just get things on the car and see what happens. You know, more points of downforce. That's what the management that doesn't understand a racing car would always push for. But a racing car has got a human being inside of there. He needs to get confidence from how the car works. He doesn't want a car that bites him. You want a car that's got good levels of downforce, but is consistent. And I think any teams that we see deviating and going off the beaten track, it's because they've chased this downforce figure at the expense of drivability. And that is just absolutely stupid. It's been stupid for decades. It's not just these regulations, but it's multiplied with these regulations because of the effect of ground effect. So will it be better for Aston Martin, for Dan Fallows to have moved on? I don't know where this other position is going to be in the Aston Martin group. But I wouldn't think it's in the Formula One team. Yeah,
well, they've got the technology division they can shove him into, can't they? And it might just be, who knows, it might just be playing out his contract or something. We don't actually know because they've not said. All they've said is that this month he's moved out. So, I think you're quite right. You won't be in F1.
But the big thing is really, you know, all these people are good people, but sometimes they end up in the wrong job. That's the problem. And that's the thing. If you can get people and position them in the correct job and where they have the best understanding, vision, it's just the understanding of a certain thing, then you get something out of it. But then suddenly, you know, everybody wants to get better. And the only way to get better is to sort of improve your position and get paid more by improving your position. And I think that's what's happened so many times to a lot of these teams. They've just moved people into positions that wasn't their forte. And while you do that, you know, if one person moves, then a whole lot of other people have to move to fill those gaps. And suddenly you've got a company that's going nowhere because everybody's in a position that it's not really theirs. It's not really something you understand well enough. It takes time to pick it all up. So you can very easily sort of be stagnant for a long, long time just by one personnel move. So I think with Adrian coming in at the beginning of next year, or whatever it is, you know, the first quarter of next year, I think they'll have somebody that everybody will recognise as being the guy who's going to be the piper. You know, now you have to dance to his tune, right or wrong, whether it be the right tune or the wrong tune. You have to know who to go to and ask the questions. Everybody else will find their own position in the fir tree, as I call it. So yeah, that'll be a big help with Adrian coming, not necessarily because he is God's gift to motor racing, and sees aerodynamics in his sleep. It's just the fact that everybody will know who they're going to answer to.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like this Fallows move, it feels like the start of the Newey era insofar as we don't know the exact reasons why it's happened. It may be that whether it's Fallows' decision or the team, but obviously Andy Cowell took up his job last month. He's the CEO, group CEO, so he replaced Martin Whitmarsh. Bob Bell's already there as Executive Director Technical. So those are the two who are kind of in charge of the structural stuff. Adrian Newey's joining in March, and although it's been said he's the one who's in charge of the structure, I feel like it's more that the structure's built around him, because Newey's not going to be sitting through a load of interviews with people and doing org charts and that kind of thing. That's not him. Cowell and Bell, I guess, will be doing that. And then the other person you've got is Enrico Cardillo, who's joining in 25 as Chief Technical Officer. So I kind of feel like this is the start of that next phase of Aston Martin. So if you want to take a positive spin on it, it could be that the wind tunnel's coming online, the new driver and loop simulator, the factory is basically completed now. So you could say this is kind of the Aston Martin project hitting the point that it was working towards. But the bit that's lagging behind is clearly the working practices and the technical knowledge and the way they've been developing the car. So I guess there's a positive from that perspective in that this could be the shift that's needed to take the team from one that's perhaps following ideas that have been picked up from all over in F1 to one that can really become self-generating and do what they keep saying they want to do. They don't want to be Red Bull, they want to be better than Red Bull, so they want to be the new standard setter in F1. Does that sound convincing?
No. I don't disagree with the fact that the building process is never easy. But on the way there, you've got to show that what you have, your group, can achieve something. There's something achievable in there. And I think really what we're looking at now, I suppose, as a comparison, is probably Haas. They're a small team. They've got huge, outside sort of assistance from Ferrari and Dallara and all sorts of stuff like that. But they're a small team doing a good job, and they can get bigger and better by doing more of what they do. But they could be spending 2-3 times the budget and doing worse because they just lose their way with it. So I don't buy into the fact that if I've the day that I've got the people that I want here and I've got 1,000 people behind them, that's the day the light switch is going to go on. I classify nearly everything in motor racing as a bit of a dimmer switch. Haas have got the dimmer switch halfway up, and they turn it up a couple more percent, or they try to turn it up a couple more percent every time they put a development part on the car, and that shows that their sort of the mental philosophy, their direction, the philosophy they have in the car design and what they're trying to get out of it is pretty decent. And you just do a little bit more of it all the time, but you don't change it. And I think that's what I think Aston Martin are looking for, that magic bullet where they just end up with this situation where they, as I say, they get 1,000. Once we get 1,000 people on the door, and we have this structure set up, we just put the light on, and suddenly we'll be winning Grand Prix, and we'll be doing it better than all those people that won Grand Prix for quite a long time. I think that's rubbish. I think they have to just be the team they are with 700, 800 people, and the expertise they have, and show that they can do enough to be, let's say, better than Haas. And I'm using Haas loosely here as a good midfield team. That's most Grand Prix this year they've knocked on the door of scoring points in one way or another. Some races they've been better than that. Some races they haven't been quite as good as that. But they've knocked on the door of being in that points at the back end of the grid, at the back end of the top 10. And that's all you can ask for. And now they can sort of try and step up that little bit. But I think for Aston Martin, the philosophy is completely wrong. It's just as I say, they want success, and they want it now, and that isn't going to happen. And because they're trying to do that, and because they're making those rash decisions on the way, firing bits on the car that are losing themselves, they're learning nothing. They're absolutely learning nothing. They're just in a sort of days of unknown. And you can feel that actually whenever you hear Fernando Alonso talk, and you can feel it in his voice, his way. It's just saying, I have no idea what's going on, really, to be honest. So I think they need to sort of make sure they allow the fact that Formula One is tough and work around that.
Yeah, it's an interesting picture, really, because, as you say, regardless of all the other things, the kind of underlying science that drives your developments is something that's grown up throughout the whole team, and it's not something there's just a sudden switch change on. And that pattern with Aston Martin has been so clear that you talked about. Where they start with, like last year, they started with a very good car. This year, they started with a good car. And then they've just regressed massively. And Haas, for example, the comparison there, they were always said to be the team that struggled to develop in season. But they've developed well through this year to the point where if you set aside those first 7 or 8 weekends, Haas has been a stronger team than Aston Martin. And they had a big upgrade in Austin that's worked pretty well for them. So that's really concerning that you can end up in this scenario where you can produce a decent starting car, and your science for doing that is okay, but then your development just goes completely haywire because it's just been the same pattern the last 2 years. It's just been bits have gone on, bits have gone off. They had the Suzuka spec floor on the car at one stage at Interlagos, and that was race 4 Suzuka this year. So that nobody else is doing that.
No, it's difficult. That's what I say. That if within the company, if your philosophy and how you do aerodynamic platform operates with changing ride heights, changing speed, all that stuff, which it happens whether you like it or not, then it doesn't matter what floors you put on the car, they'll still have that same inherent philosophy. I think what we could look at is an even better comparison. Haas is probably Alpine. Alpine, you and I were in Bahrain watching, and the Alpine looked an absolute dog. And the first races showed that it was an absolute dog. There's lots of reasons for this. It was too heavy, it was this, it was that, But never mind it being too heavy, the corners we were standing looking at, they didn't look like a nice car to drive. Whereas the Aston Martin looked pretty reasonable. And now, we get the 2 Alpines finishing second and third in a race, and the 2 Aston Martins not even finishing. So you've got a complete switch around there, and it's about that mental philosophy of what direction the car should take. And if it's not there, within the inherent sort of management group who are designing or responsible for the design and concept of the car, it doesn't matter how many bits you throw at it, you're always going to stay in that same problem. Sometimes the problem will be bigger than other times, but it'll still be a problem.
Yeah, and very much a painful season they can't wait to get to the end of. They're almost certainly going to finish 5th in the Constructors' Championship. Obviously, Alpine took a big step towards them, but it's 37 points Aston Martin have over Alpine, with Haas and RB not far behind, but teams at that part of the grid don't score particularly big. I think expecting the lightning of 35-point weekend that Alpine had in Interlagos to strike twice is unlikely, but the fact is Aston Martin's second half of this season have not even been the 5th best team, which is really worrying. Well, let's move on to our main topic now, and as alluded to earlier, the Constructors' Championship. We've got this great championship battle. The drivers is as good as done and dusted, I would say, but you've got McLaren on 593 points, Ferrari on 557, and Red Bull still in on 544 points. It's a fascinating battle, given it's really between McLaren and Ferrari, thanks to their strong lineups. Those are 2 teams. They haven't won a championship of any kind since 2008, so they've been going through various types of fallback and rebuild. So what do you make of the jobs those 2 teams have done?
I think the best way of putting it is exceptional. I think the big thing for me is that, if I take McLaren as an example, they went through their changes of direction with the Honda engine package. Then they went to Renault for a little while, and then the Mercedes. And it took them 2 or 3 years in that period to realise that actually it doesn't matter what we have in the back of the car, our car is still a dog, and we need to think about why. And obviously, I think the new regulations for 2022, when they came in, give them a chance to open that door. And they had a bit of a change in structure. I don't think they started well in 2022. I think they regrouped fairly well as the season went by, and all of that was a positive learning curve for them. And they put that into practice into 2023 and then into 2024. And I think what they have got themselves now is a group of people that can be led. They can be focused in a direction. And, I'd say that nearly all of the developments that McLaren have put on their car in the last year and a half have been pretty good developments. They haven't sort of lost themselves, and they were able to address the situation where they felt they had a good car in fast corners, but the car was poor in slow corners. I think they were able to address that and get the car to be better in slow corners and still retain the performance in the fast corners. I suppose, if anything, their car to me is still maybe a little bit inefficient. It's maybe a little bit draggy, just a little bit. But I think that everything they've done and the steps they've taken have been to recognise the problem, scratch the head, think about why, and get something on the car that made it work. And, it's like Oscar Piastri says, clean air is good air, so it's fast air. So I think that at the end of the day, they've got a car now that I think, can challenge at the front old Grand Prix, or, wet, dry, whatever. I think Lando Norris is very, very good, personally, and a one-lap specialist. I think he's still a bit weak on the first corner, on the first lap, and he's still a bit weak in wheel-to-wheel contact, I suppose you might call it, or nearly wheel-to-wheel contact. I think Oscar is maybe better in the wheel-to-wheel contact, and still not quite as fast on one lap. But they're not far apart. They're just a little bit more left in them, but they're a good pairing for sure. And if we go on to Ferrari, it's the same philosophy. We've seen on a few occasions where Ferrari have put developments on the car and lost themselves a little bit, but they didn't sort of stumble along. They bit the bullet and went backwards, or regrouped, or re-understood it. And I think now they've got themselves to a point where they have got a better understanding than they've had for a long, long time on what the car really wants aerodynamically. And I'm sitting here, abusing Ferrari and other teams about not understanding the aerodynamics of these cars. But I'm relating it to a driver in a racing car, which I've worked with for years. It doesn't matter whether it's a ground effect car or a flat bottom car or a low downforce car. It's the same. You've got to make that driver feel comfortable in the situation. He's got to pick up the messages from the car. And the big problem with the ground effect cars is they've just exaggerated all those peakiness parts, all the bits that were peaky, underfloor separation problems. It's made that all worse. So it's much, much more important now, because before, whenever you were getting a problem, you might lose 5% of the downforce suddenly because the car's just gone into that window where it's stalled the underfloor. And now you're probably losing 15% of the downforce at for the same sort of reasons. So the problem is bigger. And, it's just about all the teams, I think, are just doing the same thing. They're going around this circle where they chase, points of downforce, get more downforce out of the car. And that's all okay. But if it's not consistent downforce, the driver will not use it. And he will probably end up having, incidents and accidents just because of the fact of the car just changes balance mid-corner or the way into the corner or whenever you hit the brake pedal. So McLaren and Ferrari, I think the battle royal, it'll depend on who, between those two, who gets the best sort of weekend as far as running is concerned and optimising the setup around the car. I don't think we'll see either of them coming with anything major other than optimised parts for the given tracks that they're going to. But I wouldn't discount Red Bull either, I know the minute we look at it and say, well, they've only got one driver, and that's pretty true, but somewhere along the line, I am expecting Perez to arrive one weekend and see the old Perez. I don't know what's going to make that happen, but somewhere along the line, the car doesn't suit his driving style at the moment. And if they can actually get something on the car that will make it suit his driving style, then, he can still be up front. But the car doesn't suit him, and I think that's what Max is showing, that really the car is a bit of a handful. And Perez doesn't like that handful, whereas Max sort of lives with it. So, it's not over between the three teams yet, I don't think.
And it is quite well set up, because obviously these three cars that are in it, they have quite different characteristics. So you go to Vegas at altitude 2,000 feet. The Ferrari, which is very good in slow corners, seems to be very good in aero efficiency, good traction, rides well. So Vegas feels like Ferrari territory. A few weeks ago, you just said with confidence that Qatar was McLaren territory and it should still be quite good, but Red Bull have taken a good step. They're pretty strong in the faster corner, so Red Bull could be a factor there. Could be a difficult one for Ferrari that's not so good in the fast corners. And then you get Abu Dhabi that's sort of a little bit more slow corners, but a bit more of a mix. So what I quite like is not only have you got three teams that can theoretically win the Constructors' Championship, but they've all got very different strengths and weaknesses. And even when they're at tracks that are playing to those strengths and weaknesses, it's not a chasm of time. So, as you say, it comes into how well they're executing. So it's, I know the Constructors' Championship is kind of not the box office championship for people, but this is a really fascinating battle, the kind of which we haven't had for a long time, actually, with three teams very much in contention. And as you say, if Perez can start picking up some proper points, then Red Bull can't be discounted.
No, I agree with you. And it's interesting because, you say, all three cars have got reasonably different characteristics. They all end up in the same sort of circle at the end of the day because every track has got a selection of corners and a selection of straight lengths. So, one car can be a little bit better in certain parts of it. But the end result is they usually end up in the same 2 or 3 tenths of a second lap time. The thing that the Constructors' Championship is, it's the money box championship. It's where the money comes from, and it's a lot of money relative to each position in the championship. It's a little bit sort of different in a way now because of this wind tunnel time that you lose if you do better, but that doesn't come into play for a while. So,
and that's a silver lining at best, isn't it? That's not something you would aim for.
No,
it's not big enough to make the difference.
No, you wouldn't aim for the wind tunnel time, but if you are at a position where you're sort of safe, I suppose, you would take a risk and do some bits and pieces if you can't gain a position, but you're not going to get caught from behind. But if you could, if you're a couple of points ahead of somebody else, maybe it's worth throwing that away and just saying, okay, I'll go for the less money in the wind tunnel time. Depends on how big your pocket is, I suppose. For me, it would always been about trying to get the best result on a given day, no matter where you were, because that's what racing should be about. But as I say, it's as a round figure, it's like 10 million per championship position, Constructors' Championship position. So, you can't throw that away. That's a big sponsor, and for the smaller teams, that's valuable money. For the front running teams, maybe not quite so much. So at the end of the day, is Red Bull happy to finish third in the Constructors and maybe throw away 30 million, but get that bit of extra wind tunnel time for the future? It depends on how big the fight is. Is that why they sort of want to see out Perez's contract, because they're happy enough that one driver is going to show that their car has great potential, the other driver might not? And that's all you got to do, because you can easily sort of stand back and watch and say, oh, well, our car can still be in the podium or win races. But, Sergio has to up his game if he's going to be with us for much longer. So there's a lot of politics is on in the background, I suppose. But I just like to see pure, straightforward, hard racing. And let's see these next 3 races and see what happens.
McLaren's the particularly interesting case because while both Ferrari and McLaren have had these long droughts, Ferrari has at least fought for championships since it won that last Constructors' title in 2008, whereas McLaren, they're a few years early on in that drought where they had a car that was probably quick enough to maybe have fought for championships, but they didn't have reliability in operation, that kind of thing. But McLaren's been on this very, very long journey, hasn't it, through the Honda years. They had that rude awakening when they changed engine and didn't suddenly discover that they didn't have a brilliant car that was just let down by the engine, which I think they convinced themselves to do. And obviously there were times when McLaren themselves didn't like some of the things you were saying about their team that, to be honest, have been pretty much borne out. So I think we've got to give them quite a bit of credit for the progress that's been made. And it's sort of the Zach Brown era, isn't it? When they had, after they changed to Renault, kind of the middle of that season, they realised, right, we've got to make some bigger changes. Yeah. And that sort of set them on the long path back to this point where they're now, you can make a case for McLaren being the team of the season this year, because even though Lando Norris isn't going to win the Drivers' Championship, you could certainly say that car, certainly after the first few races, when they put that Miami upgrade on, the car has been good enough to be a winner of both championships.
Oh, I agree with you. And there's two reasons there I'd like to sort of highlight. McLaren, as you say, they came from sort of being in the doldrums through the Honda era. And they got the concrete recognition whenever they changed the Renault engine, that it didn't sort of suddenly, you put an engine in there that's okay, not the best in the pit lane by any means, but okay, and you're still not winning races. So they had a big head scratcher at that point in time to try to build a plan that would take them forward. And they've had ups and downs since then. I think it was Bahrain where they could hardly run because of the brakes overheating and stupid stuff, really. But that's been good because they've kept their focus and they've kept their building program. They've kept their direction. Andrea Stella's doing a good job, I think, in the fact of calming everybody down, keeping them focused in their direction. That I keep saying you need to have a car that's driver friendly. Whereas if it goes on to Ferrari, and you're saying there they've been challenging for championships and that for a long time, since 2008. They've won races. So they've been sort of stagnant, They've never been in the doldrums dramatically. They've been all right. There's lots of reasons you could look at and say, well, actually, we just need a bit more luck, or the pit stops wasn't right, or, so on and so forth. They've never really had that doldrum period where they'd sort of really had to regroup. I'm sure they have if you looked at it deep enough. But in general, through those years, they were still able to be challenging here and there at some point in time. So they had a performance that was not consistent enough by any means, but it was still able to be there. So suddenly, whenever you got that sort of situation, you're not actually sort of digging deep enough to make it better. You're actually just sort of going along, bouncing along merrily, saying, well, this race could be good for us, and we'll, it's like go to Monaco and be in pole and win the race, and that might be the only race of the season, or whenever it's happened various times to Ferrari. They've always had that opportunity to be sort of fairly competitive here and there. But I think sometimes if that satisfies you for a little while, that's actually worse for you than a real doldrum situation where you've got to dig deep to find the solution.
And also, I think it's difficult to overestimate how important it will be for any of these teams. I mean, probably slightly less important for Red Bull to win the Constructors' Championship because they've won plenty recently, but they'll still be desperate to do it. And obviously, must remember that employee bonuses are usually based on championship position, so that's hugely significant personally for people, which is at the root of some of the frustration within the team at Sergio Perez. But Ferrari, they've had 15 seasons without a championship of any kind, and that's equaling the record. They had a 15-season drought between 83 and 99 when they won the Constructors' Championship, and counting up to the end of last year, that's 15 seasons. So Ferrari can avoid a record drought for them in Formula One in terms of championships, and for McLaren it would just be such a great validation of after this long journey they've been through, that this is going to matter so much, just as much as the Drivers' Championship would matter. This is a proper battle royale, which is why in some ways it's quite nice that the focus is on the Constructors' Championship for once.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'd say that's the team championship, I suppose you might call it. I mean, the drivers is a very individual thing. It's still a team performance, obviously, but the team championship comes from being able to put together a team that's got two good drivers that can score good points every weekend. That both cars are reliable, both cars bring home points, and the team works as a team. Sometimes, I've had it on a few occasions where sort of the garage gets split down the middle and each driver's, going off his own tangent. And that never really works. It never really works for a team effort. It works for the individual effort sometimes. But I think the Constructors is a great, it is the team championship. So it's good that we're doing that now and seeing these last three races, because as we both say, or I think everybody would say, Max has got a pretty good handle on the Drivers' Championship. So the reality of it is, other than the numbers, it's more or less over. So the Constructors is the one where you got to fight for it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a great battle for everyone to watch in the final triple header. Well, let's move on to the final part of the podcast now, which is always a favourite, the listener questions. If you'd like to ask a question for Gary about anything technical, ancient or modern in F1, as long as there's some tangential technical relevance to it, it's very, very welcome here. Send it to podcasts@therace.com. That's podcasts@the-race.com. And we will try to get through as many as we can. And we've got a good bunch this week, so let's pile straight into them. The first one is from Marco Hopman, Gary, on the subject of downforce and aero rules. I've been following F1 since the 1990s, and the difficulties of cars following closely and thus overtaking has been a constant topic. My suggestion is to ban all wings, have a simple set of rules that stipulate that the highest point of the car shall be the roll bar, and all surface visible in plan view must slope down from this point. Similarly, all planes visible from below must slope up. A degree of downforce would still be generated by the floor, hopefully sufficient to keep the car on the ground. I imagine Formula Ford's on steroids, big engines, fat tyres, limited downforce. How much slower would cars like this be? Yeah, a fair bit slower would be my initial reaction to that.
Yeah, I imagine they would be a fair bit slower. They would. I mean, it's like anything. Obviously, everybody has an opinion on what makes things work. I think you don't necessarily have to ban all wings. You could very simply have, and I'm just using this as an example. You could very simply have a regulation which says that the size of the rear wing you use in Monza is what you have to use for the season. You can't use anything bigger than that. So Monaco, you'd be running around there with a Monza rear wing in the car. The car would be obviously sliding around a lot. But what it would do is it would reduce the load on the tyres quite dramatically. So then I think the tyre manufacturer could make a tyre that wasn't having to withstand those huge forces. I mean, some of these cars are producing, 5 tons of downforce. And that, the tyre has to withstand that. So the structure of the tyre, the pressure in the tyre, everything that's happening there is reducing potentially tyre grip. So it's not just about banning the aerodynamics and leaving everything else the same. It's about, I think, finding mechanisms that allow the cars to have more mechanical grip through the tyres and allow more movement through the ride height. So it's a difficult thing to do. Would it fix the fact that, of overtaking? Probably not, because I've watched Formula Ford races at Brands Hatch, and overtaking's not easy either, and you got no wings. So every formula has its own problem, as far as, when two cars want to go into the same corner together, somebody has to give up somewhere or another. And it's not just the fact the aerodynamics on a Formula 1 car means that you can't follow another car. Following and overtaking are two different things. Following another car, you're in the wake of that other car, you lose downforce, and it hurts your tyres in Formula 1. But to be able to come up the inside of somebody and outbrake them and go through a corner faster than them that's not following. That is just the fact that you need to have a car that's got a better grip level, more compliant, more understanding of it. But suddenly the track gets narrower by the width of another car, which is 2 meters wide. So it's not just aerodynamics and cars losing downforce. That happens. But as I say, that's one of the things that hurt other people, the following cars' tyres, more than the fact that overtaking doesn't happen because of the turbulence. I think the wing designs should be more brutal, as far as not so sophisticated aerodynamic design. A 2-element front wing, for example, would have to be a brutal package than a very sophisticated 4-element front wing, where just the flow on that wing is so critical that a small amount of turbulence affects it. So I think there's lots of ways to look at something and to do things. But throwing away all the downforce and all the wings is probably not it. Whenever you've got 1,000 horsepower, the guys want some grip. It's quite important. The stability of the car is quite important, especially when you're talking about speeds that will in excess of 300 kilometers an hour. If you've got a car that changes its attitude at that speed, it becomes an airplane, and that's the last thing you want. So downforce is important, but just having something that's more robust wing designs, I think, might be the right thing. And even the underfloor could be a more robust underfloor. But, where do you draw the line as far as the regulations controlling the teams? Why not have a one-make formula? I mean, we see, Formula 2, Formula 3, it's one-make formulas, but there's still racing going on. relatively they're all the same car, but there's still a winner and there's still a loser. It's life. That's what it's about. Sport's about that. There's somebody that does a better job, whether it's the driver, whether it's the team or whatever. There's somebody that does a better job than somebody else. That's what competition is.
And we've got a second question from Marco Hopman on car weight. Ballooning car weights have made the current cars very heavy, with the main influences that I can see being safety and batteries. I agree we cannot reduce safety, but if engines were normally aspirated biofuel engines and sensible dimensional limits, how much lighter could F1 cars be? Well, for reference, the minimum mass right now is 798 kilos. And it's 724 for 2026, or rather 724 plus whatever the nominal weight of the tyres is. So how much more could be hacked off of that by removing the batteries, do you reckon?
It's a difficult one. I think the battery package, the maximum weight for it is 25 kilograms from memory, just from the regulations. And you've got various electric motors and control systems and all that stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a saving of maybe 40 to 50 kilograms just from going to, if you just took it as keeping a V6 engine with a turbo on it, you say normally aspirated. I'm just talking leaving that other package alone. Get rid of the turbo, run more higher revs on a V6 engine. You'd probably be looking at 50, 60 kilograms of saving. So not the end of the world, but a significant saving. And it's one of these sort of things where really, again, it's like the aerodynamics. What's the reason for it? I think the cars are too heavy. And if you look at the cars, you look at the mess of componentry around the cars that the teams put there, it's incredible. So I think that, easily that if you put the weight regulations down a bit, you could have very quickly, some teams would be able to achieve it. Not all teams would be able to achieve it, but some teams would be able to achieve it. So you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's about making sure that you're doing the right thing. I would like to see engines doing 18,000 RPM or something again. It's good screamers, whatever, V8, V10. It doesn't really matter. Whatever the V configuration would be of them, just good noisy engines again. And I think that it's wrong to throw away the energy that's being wasted under deceleration. Why would you want to do that? So if you can harness that energy practically and put it back into the car, then it's fine. But maybe the whole electrical package needs to be just a certain weight. As I say, as far as I can remember from the regulations, it's 25 kilograms for the battery pack, and plus other various bits and pieces. So maybe the whole electrical system maybe just needs to be a maximum of 25 kilograms. But, if you had that, then you weigh that up against the fuel saving that you have at the beginning of the race. So you limit the fuel, as we do now. So the power package is created by fuel and re-energizing the battery pack. So there's a formula in there somewhere that would take the weight down a bit. I would love to see it a bit lower. We've got 798, as you say, Ed. I'd love to see it sort of be put at 698 and set a challenge, and then look closely at everything again to see what's on the cars there that is a bit daft as far as weight's concerned. They are too big. Just make them smaller. A smaller Formula One car will be a lighter Formula One car. So get the weight down, reduce the overall aerodynamic, the overall downforce, and let's go racing.
And to throw a number in for 26, the minimum mass of the power unit is 185 kilos. That's everything in the power unit. So with the conventional, the turbo weighs a bit as well, but you could probably, by going to that suggested form of engine, you could lop 85 kilos off that pretty easily. I'd have thought, by having a small engine with a turbo. Yes,
I mean, the engine that we were using, the Ford engine we were using in 1999 was 96 kilograms from memory. It created a Formula One car. It was good. It was different. You weren't trying to do, 3.5, 5,000 kilometers or whatever with it. It was definitely a 400 kilometer engine if you were lucky. But that's a different dimension, a different world for that. So you don't have to go down to less than 100 kilograms. The Yamaha we had in 1992 was 137 kilograms. So there's a big window there. You know, somewhere between 100 and 110 is probably a package that you could have as a really good, you know, power unit to supply a pretty decent amount of power.
Yeah, but then, of course, you've got the question of whether you'd have manufacturers involved, et cetera, that sort of drifting into the world of politics and automotive car development, etc. But there's all sorts of factors that play a role there. Next question comes from Jay Menon. Once again, a question for you on our favourite topic, tyres. With the weight and size of the spec of F1 car coupled with high levels of downforce and lack of tyre testing, would it even be possible for a tyre manufacturer, Pirelli or another, to build a more durable tyre?
Well, Jay, I think it's very difficult to build a more durable tyre. I think we sort of covered that really with what we were talking about a little bit earlier. You know, the loads that these tyres are seeing is horrendous. And that the cars braking at 6 to 7G, laterally, you know, 4G consistently, 4.5G peaks in fast corners. The tyre gets, you know, there's 4 bits of black rubber that connect that car, which is, as I say, 798 kilograms, to the ground. And it has all that load laterally, longitudinally, or vertically has to go through that bit of rubber. It's a pretty harsh environment for it to be working in, to be honest. So I think it would be very difficult for another tyre manufacturer to come in and just take it on without time. I mean, obviously tyre manufacturers, they're massive companies. Michelin, you know, yes, Michelin could do it. Would the tyre be any better? I don't know. Michelin might think it would be better. But I think the environment where we got to at the moment, where I believe the FIA are nearly too involved in the things that they don't know much about, which is, again, like tyres. I mean, they stipulate a lot of what the tyre should be. And Pirelli have to sort of abide by that and do the best they can within it. So, you know, there was reasons for they were briefed on the fact that they wanted a tyre that degraded, a tyre that fell off a cliff. They wanted to see, action coming in from the FIA at the time. You know, they wanted to see action in the race. They didn't want to see a procession from lap 1 to the checkered flag. So they wanted to see action where this tyre would sort of drop off a cliff suddenly. So I think, the FIA are a little bit too involved with everything that they don't really need to be involved with. And I think that's one of the things why Michelin haven't really sort of bought into the fact that they might actually give it a shot, because they don't want to be going out and building a tyre because they're told to do this. They want to go out and build a tyre because they're Michelin. So if another tyre company did come in, and I'm using Michelin as a loose word here because they're obviously involved in motorsport, then I think that they would need to have the opportunity to make a better tyre, and that would take a little bit of time. When they came in, when we used them with the Jaguar in 2000, I mean, we spent 1999 doing various tyre testing with Thomas Christensen driving. And they went through their homework, and some of the stuff that, I learned at that point in time with working with them and going to tests was incredible. What they didn't understand about rubber didn't exist. They really were very, very good understanding rubber and what you could do with it.
And we may well get the chance to test that, because Pirelli might well not continue after their current contract, which is to 27. I think there's a 1-year option on that as well. So it's possible in a few years' time we might see another manufacturer taking on the challenge. The final question comes from Robert Medic. The FIA wants to keep control of the cars, whereas the teams want no limits. Would making the front and rear wings the same for all teams, but then having the rest of the chassis open and free be the best compromise? The front and rear wings would limit how far the development can ultimately go. So we've got another wing limitation idea there, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, it's the simple things, I suppose. What do you want to see? I mean, I personally like to see the cars looking different. I like to see the wings looking different. So I would sort of head a little bit the other direction. I would head for let's say a spec chassis that you can clothe in whatever way you want. Because the chassis, every team spends a huge amount of money on going through all the crash tests. That's all the safety structure. So if between them they could come up with one genuine concept for a chassis and get the dual blogs carbon manufacturers to make it, for everybody, and then you clothe it. You clothe it with your side pods, your underfloor, your nose profile, your wings, because that's the areas that actually give you performance as well. So it would be, you wouldn't be wasting so much effort and time on on something that every team is wasting a huge amount of effort and time on, and you would still get a performance differential. And, we don't see the engine, we don't see the chassis. We see, a sort of periphery of it a little bit around the outside. But we don't actually see the sort of intricacy of how the fuel tank goes in, or the seat back, or the dash bulkhead, or how the front suspension mounts in the chassis, or whatever. So it's one of those sort of situations where you take away the bits that are of no avail to the viewer or the enthusiast or anything, but allow the bits that are around the outside that make the performance work and the visual change on those parts, so you can recognise team from team. So, yeah, I'd look at it the other way around. I don't really want to see the FIA stepping in and saying, this is your wing design. I think there's lots of things you could do, where you could say, okay, you put a wing on the car for the first race in Bahrain, that has to stay on for, 4 races, that wing. And, that you can adjust the flap, so you can alter the level of it, but that wing and its bits have got to stay on there for 4 races. Then you can do a change if you want to. So you're making up your mind those downforce levels for for 4 race specs at a time, maybe even more, maybe even 6 races. Depends, because that would control stupidity of just constantly making parts that are, they're different, but you've got to see them so intricately to understand that they're different. Why? Why do you need to have a new wing for every Grand Prix you go to? You don't have to have a new wing for every Grand Prix. So sometimes it would be better to try and control the teams from themselves.
Well, these are all going to be ideas that can be discussed when F1 gets into its next rules discussions, which is going to be pretty soon, given that the 26 regs are now pretty much set, and then we're going to have a new set of rules probably in 2030. So, that's very much the way F1 is now, with these constant cycles of regulations. So we can get on with some arguing on that. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions. If you've got a question for Gary, send it to podcasts@therace.com. That's podcasts@the-race.com. We're going to be back during the triple header, so before the last round of the championship. Hopefully the Constructors' Championship battle will still be alive then. So join us then for more from Gary.
The Athletic.